what you are basically. Deep, deep down, far, far in, is simply the fabric and structure of existence itself.
Peace for all men and women, for all men and women, for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, peace in all time.
Honestly expressing yourself.
Peace for all men and women, for all men and women, for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, peace in all time.
The fabric and structure of existence itself.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Parallel Mike podcast. I'm your host Mike, and on tonight's show we have a very special guest. Her name is Professor Valentina Zharkova. She has a PhD in astrophysics. She is also a lecturer at Northumbria University, and she is one of the world's leading experts when it comes to the solar cycle. Now, we've discussed the solar cycles many times here on the podcast before in relation to things like the financial markets, like cycles of war and empire, and also in relation to the climate. Now, it was actually Valentina Zharkova who pioneered much of the most recent research that suggests that starting from right now, we are heading towards a mini ice age. So it's Valentina's theory that we are heading into a grand solar minimum. Now, for those that don't understand what that is, we have a solar cycle. It's an 11-year repeating cycle where we have the sun become very active, giving off these tremendous solar flares that can cause disruption here on planet Earth. And we had Ben Davidson on the show a few months back, and he was talking about how one of these solar flares could actually take out the entire energy grid of the world, given our magnetic poles seem to be shifting. We're having this weakening of the magnetic field, and it's lowering our protection from those solar flares, which aren't really increasing per se. It's just that our protection is rapidly decreasing. So that's a part of the 11-year cycle. That's the maximum, which is where we are right now. And then we go into the minimum, which is the bottom part of that cycle, and we have very few solar flares. So that's the 11-year cycle. However, there is a big 350-year cycle as well, where we have grand solar maximums and grand solar minimums, which is where we have a period of 30 to 50 years of extremely pronounced activity on the upside and then on the downside too. So on the upside, it's where the climate would get extremely warm. We'd have massive amounts of solar activity for a long period of time. And then on the downside, we'd actually go into the mini ice age. And this is precisely what Valentina is predicting we are now entering, and she's got a lot of good reasons to think that. Now, of course, you can only imagine the controversy that Valentina's research has caused, because she's telling us that the planet's going to get a lot colder at a time when there is a massive agenda to tell the world that we are going towards global boiling. Yes, that's what they're calling it now, global boiling. And therefore, we must give up all of our rights and all of our freedoms, not to mention destroy our food supply and eat the bugs and live in smart cities and not fly and not have any fossil fuels and not go out of our house very much ever again, just so the government and these NGOs can save us from climate change. Well, that's what they're telling us, but Valentina says that ain't so. And I know it ain't so either, because I've looked into the research myself, but Valentina is a professor, so her research carries a little bit more weight than old Parallel Mike's. But you can only imagine the controversy that was stirred up. It was like kicking a hornet's nest, and they actually tried to get Valentina's university to sack her and retract the paper. They didn't succeed, thankfully, and Valentina is a tough lady, and she's continued to speak the truth and say, no, it's not going to get hotter, it's going to get much colder. So getting Valentina on the show was not easy. She's a very busy woman, so this is a real honor for us. However, unfortunately, the first part of the interview didn't record, so that was just a twist of fate. So this one's going to be a shorter episode, which means it's mainly going to be for members only. I am going to be putting some of it out publicly, so that's what you'll hear right now. But members, please do go over to parallelmike.com to sign in and listen to the full episode. You certainly don't want to miss this one, because the implications are absolutely profound, and whether Valentina's right or wrong is not necessarily the point. It's more about understanding what could be happening and hearing somebody's argument for that, the same as we did with Ben Davidson. So with that, my friends, I'm going to end this extended introduction. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you're all well, healthy, and reasonably happy. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Okay, everybody, just to let you know, this interview starts a little bit abruptly because the first 15 minutes of the interview sadly did not record. Just be warned that Valentina begins with some technical discussion around her research. It's not an easy thing to understand for a layperson, but don't worry, as we go through the interview, we do get to the broad topics around the grand solar minimum, the mini ice age, the controversy around her research. But this one was a fantastic conversation, certainly one of the most important ones I think we've done here on the podcast. So without further ado, let's get to my conversation with the brilliant Dr. Valentina Zharkova. Okay, Valentina, can you just tell us a little bit more about how you came across this research and what did it tell you about the sun and its role on climate change in comparison to what they tell us, which is that it's all man-made, it's anthropogenic, and we're getting warmer because of our activity. But I'm guessing your research told you something else.
It came absolutely unexpectedly. So I've been from different topics, and only because we did a database of sunspots for 12 years in the cycle 23 from 1996 for 2006 or 2010. This is why I decided to compare this with the solar activity and look at the sunspots. So this orange pancake is the sun. How you see it, visible light. And these dark spots, the sunspots. And sunspots are part of the magnetic loop embedded into the photosphere. You see many sunspots, but these spots are area very tiny, and the loops are above them. They produce the solar activity. So we decided to make a solar activity index with sunspots, which was very difficult to do because you see the area covered by sunspot very tiny compared for the whole area of the sun. And whatever you do, either artificial intelligence or any method, you always get big errors. So this is to look at the different part of the data, looking at the sun. Let's look at the whole sun. We look at the magnetic field of the whole sun. But the whole sun has 1024 by 1024 pixels. And its behavior of the background magnetic field is similar to sunspot, has similar butterfly diagram, which led to the conclusion, all right, we can compare how they interact. So we look at the background magnetic field measured from Wilcox Solar Observatory in Stanford on the top, and the leading polarity magnetic field in sunspots. And what we found that basically they have the similar behavior. The only thing that background field always has opposite polarity to the leading polarity of sunspot. Literally, background field either allow the sunspot appear or doesn't allow, depending which polarity they are. So what we needed at this stage to deal with this background magnetic field, we needed something like glass prism to separate. On the left-hand side, you have white light, and because of different refraction law, on the right-hand side, you have very nice rainbow. This is for electromagnetic radiation light. But I needed the similar one for magnetic field because everything we see on the surface is a combination of all this. So this is why I use principal component analysis. And after that, when we run full this data for 3 solar cycles, we discovered these 2 eigenvectors or 2 waves running simultaneously in the sun. When we discovered this one, was like a eureka moment because we thought, oh my God, if we have this one, first of all, with these 2 components, we managed to quantify them with the 5 cosine functions, series of cosine functions. And they're not very linear. So people cannot guess that even phase of the waves will be dependent cosine of cosine. So when we have these 2 components defined analytically, we could calculate these components to the next few cycles, compared time in cycle 24 when we didn't measure, but already had. It took us 5 years before we got this result. And the solid line shows calculation, and the dotted line shows what was extracted from the data, magnetic data. And we found the formula describes very nicely these 2 curves. And then we use formula, calculated these 2 curves to the cycle 25, 26. And what do we see? We see that the waves come into antiphase. You see that the blue wave has maximum and the red wave has minimum. And especially in cycle 26, they're absolutely an antiphase. We thought, oh, what does it mean? You're doing research, suddenly forget about high energy particles and everything. Because this one, it is a puzzle. So we decided to calculate the summary curve of these two curves and see, this is the result in what we see on the surface. We found the new solar activity index. And what is nice, this index has analytical formula. So I can calculate as long as I run my computer for 1,000, 1,000, 100,000 years. You understand it. But what was most interesting that we were in cycle 24 then, and suddenly we discovered the cycle 25, 26, the amplitude reduces. I said, why it is reduced? They started saying it was, at that time, people from Yorkshire asked me to give a talk, but global warming, it was, I think 2007 or 2008, when they signed Kyoto Agreement. And they asked me to investigate this. So basically, I got into solar activity on the request from one of Yorkshire, I think it was conservative group from South Yorkshire. They invited me to the talk, and I needed to investigate. So I started to investigate. It was well before we done these sunspots, but I discovered the solar activity actually is decreasing, but the temperature is increasing. But what is causing increased temperature was not clear. But then I investigated. The temperature is increasing on the Earth, but also increasing on Mars, because ice caps on Mars were melting at the same time like ours. And Jupiter had typhoons, which didn't have before. So obviously, it looks like it's happening not from the Earth. We can't affect either Jupiter or Mars. But this is what I arrived to here. When I got here, I thought, okay, solar activity is reducing, but temperature is still increasing. So let's find out, because I have the formula. I calculated this formula for 2,000 years. And this is how I arrived to the big contradiction with the anthropogenic global warming people. What can we say?
How do they explain, Valentina, the grand solar minimums and the solar cycle? Because as far as your research shows us, these are key pivotal cycles, and you can find an awful lot of scientific information on them. But the moment it comes to discussing global cooling, all of a sudden they don't matter. So how are they explaining away these big solar cycles?
Oh, don't explain. They say there is no cooling. They started writing papers that there was no cooling during the month minimum. So they said there were people like inventing the points and something. So they started denying that it was cold and Thames River and Danube River frozen during Mount the Minimum.
Can you tell listeners about that Mount the Minimum, please, Valentina? Just explain what it was and what people observed, and also just the historic record on that, because it's widely known that Mount the Minimum happened. It's in books, it's in novels, it's in personal testimony, it's in the scientific record. So maybe you could tell listeners a little bit about it, because they might not be aware.
What I can say about grand solar minimum, that it was cold. But this is what happened in beginning of 18th century. The surface temperature on Earth was reduced all over the globe. Europe and North America went into deep freeze. Alpine glacier extended to the valley of Foundland. Sea ice crept south from Arctic. Danube and Thames River and canals are frozen, and Netherlands canals are frozen. So this is the map of the temperature decrease during the Mount the Minimum, was created Schindler et al. 201 Science. They used the stations mostly in Northern Hemisphere. In Southern Hemisphere at that time, we didn't have any stations, because you remember whom Great Britain sent to Australia, so they were not exactly scientists. So, but this, what you can see, that decrease of the temperature by 1 degree approximately, dark blue, happened in Northern America and the Europe and the whole Asia when the Russia is. So this is what is grand solar minimum. And it is a drop of temperature because the drop of abundance of ozone created by reduction ultraviolet light in stratosphere, because the sun went into grand solar minimum. And because of that, what is happening when they have enough ozone, the stable jet stream follows in the middle hemisphere, and this is what we have, Gulf Stream and others, and the temperature patterns. But when the ozone is reduced, cold air moves to the south and creates these big wavy jet streams, which bring cold air toward the deep south, like we see in this year in America, in Florida, in Texas, Carolina, and Louisiana. And we see snow south of Greece. It was a couple of days ago, Cyprus, Saudi Arabia. So this is what is happening. So these giant wiggles, jet streams, allow Arctic air come to the lower latitudes, kicks off North Atlantic oscillations, and this changes the balance of pressure between Greenland and the lower latitudes and causes this Mount the Minimum very cold weather. And it lasted, in Mount the Minimum, it lasted for 65 years.
Wow, so 65 years is a long time. And these happen cyclically, right? They happen every 350, 400
the
years.
grand solar cycle happens every 330, 350 years. So the last grand solar minimum finished 1710. So now you add 300, 330, we arrive to the next one. So this is the shortest. It was the strong grand solar cycle. But you see the grand solar cycle, some of them, like current one, has 330 years, another has 350. And this one, like 4, has 380. It depends in which time it occurs. But we now came through this 300 years from Mount the Minimum, and it is another turn for this to wave, interfere again, and produce this grand solar minimum. And we had grand solar minimum, many of them, like in here, we had the Gomeric minimum in here in 800 before Christ. We had Oort minimum in 11th century. We had Wolf minimum in the 13th century. We have Mount the Minimum in this 16th, 17th century. But this, what they called for a minimum, it was actually the explosion of supernova, Vela Junior, about 600 light years from the Milky Way galaxy, which produced very strong increase of background gamma radiation. And when they calculated the time from the biomass for isotope C14 for this period, they used their own background. They used average background, which relevant now. At that time, it was very strong, and this is why they got errors in detecting time. So obviously, this minimum is related probably mostly to the Mount the Minimum and part of it to the Wolf one. So we hit basic minima, which are already, and we know that these grand solar minima occur regularly. So it is not something out of order. The Earth had them thousands, if not millions. So this is what we discovered, that it is a new index of solar activity, this summary curve. But the main thing is there is a grand solar minimum, which was upon us in 2015. It was 10 years ago when we discovered it. You understand it, yeah? And they started saying they will never happen. This grand solar minimum never happened. So I looked what people presented in the literature, and they presented that this is the variation of solar radiance derived from the biomass, from leaves and everything, from the isotope and biomass. And they discovered that the grand solar minimum, Mount the Minimum, reduction of solar radiation was about 3 watt per square meter, while some of them now deny, but this reduction was actually supported by this number of authors listed below. So you can't just throw out that it didn't occur. It did. Then people calculated the temperatures, and this is what discovered that during Mount the Minimum, the temperature was decreased, not linearly, but in maximum about by 1 degree Celsius. This is what happened. And this, I explain why it is happening, because reduction of solar activity already. And what we got, we arrived, basically, we see now we have this grand solar minimum upon us, because even in Great Britain, it was cold winter, reasonably cold, but it will be much colder the next 5 years. So get prepared.
So this is only just the beginning, Valentina. But when you say 1 degree Celsius, it doesn't sound like a lot. People say, well, how will 1 degree make it so much more difficult to live and so cold? So when you say 1 degree, can you translate that to listeners what that actually means in terms of what we're going to see?
Average 1 degree. How can I say? The exchange between various terrestrial processes and decrease 1 degree Celsius, decrease the temperature of the ocean. And this, instead of El Nino, which brings the hot air, we will have La Nina, which brings the cold air. And this is what happened, remember, in US and Canada last year and happened now. So this were how the Earth responds for reduction of solar radiation, because solar radiation in general was 1,366 watt per square meter. It's a huge amount, isn't it? But suddenly decrease only by 3 watt per square meter gives you this snow. You see the snow. And another snow in Australia in the springtime. November is their springtime. It is like our May. It was in there. And this snow, we know, it was snow this 21, 23rd September south of Africa. South Africa, they never had snow. There were pictures of lions and giraffes looking at the snow, probably not knowing what to do. I had this somewhere, but not in this slide. So basically, this grand solar minimum is here, and it will be distributed not linearly. So there's shown that map. Some Northern America, Canada, and United States, and Europe, and plus Russia, Siberia, they will be most affected. But we don't know, southern hemisphere will be also affected. So the temperature will be start reducing because of the change of the patterns, how the temperature is delivered to the Earth. So if you have reduction of radiation a little bit, you see ozone reduced, then you have the whole jet stream changes. And when the jet stream changes, this is why we have this Arctic air arriving. And it doesn't matter if it arrives only for 1 month or so, but if we have snow, and this is the time to put your wheat into in April. We have snow in April, say, and people put wheat in the field waiting that it start growing and have the harvest in the autumn. But it was snow and frost for the whole 2-3 weeks. And this wheat didn't actually grow. So you need to do this again in May. In May, if you have enough vegetation period until September to get this wheat to grow, and I'm saying it can be fruits, it can be vegetables, it can be anything. So this is where we are coming to. We're coming to the effect that the Earth responds to tiny reduction of the solar radiation very dramatically. And this is led me to think, how can we think on Earth that we can affect anything on the Earth if tiny reduction of solar radiation affects so strongly our temperature? Do you understand now my position, right?
I do. And I think listeners are probably starting to get a clear understanding of why the grand solar minimum is so important, because just looking at some of the slides that you've shown me, you're talking about things like food shortages, potentially famines, increases in volcanic and earthquake activity. So if we are going to go into this period, Valentina, it sounds to me like what we would be doing now, what we should be doing is getting ourselves ready, because it's going to be a period of real hardship. But the people who are telling us that there's man-made global warming are doing the opposite. They're taking out food production. They're telling us to reduce our emissions. They're adding solar panels and renewables. So what's going on? You must be scratching your head and thinking, this is madness, right?
Absolutely. These are very irresponsible steps of the people without any education or knowledge. These are, I don't know, I have some website when people say, why the government think if we pay the taxes to the government, then it will be a reduction of the temperature. It is nonsense. You understand now. We need as much energy resources. Food, everything grows, it's not growing, but we need to heat the houses. And you don't understand another problem, which is not in my slide, that electric power stations are designed for particular power. And this power is calculated that during the day, most population is in the offices. They do not consume the power. So all the power is consumed by plants and the factories. When the cold comes and people cannot get to work, they start heating their houses. They consume the full power, which means nothing will be left for the companies, for the transportation, for other. So what they would need to actually cut off different part of residential electricity in order to feed the plants and the transportation, because most of the transportation is now, at least on the earth, getting electrical. So this is why I say don't buy electric cars, because there will be very, very expensive toys standing on your driveway, which you cannot charge anywhere. It will not be possible. There is no enough electricity. And renewables, they are very imminent. They work only when the wind is not strong. During the frost and cold, there is no wind. They stop working. During frost and cold, all solar panels will be covered with the snow, not working. So we only need to have energy resources from fossil fuel, from gas, even from coal. Coal could save us. And I would, if I would in government, I would start taking coal from our interior and recover the coal station, because there is no time to build nuclear station. For each nuclear station, you need approximately 8-10 years. And we basically 8-10 years, it will be the worst of the ground solar minimum and little ice age. So this is really critical situation. I have supporters in the United States. We wrote a letter to the government of the United States, which now at least started getting some common sense with this, and many people do understand. We have the whole Clintel community, who leading scientists who united and contacted the United Nations and others, trying to deliver them the full extent of the problem. And nature helped us. The snow in California. Did you see the pictures in snow on palms in California? And the snow in New Orleans or Texas or Florida, and frost, -11. They never saw this. It actually tells that I'm telling the truth. And it is only beginning. The sun's still in the solar maximum. And imagine next 5 years, it goes down, and goes down pretty quick. If you remember my first modulus America, you remember how cycle 26 becomes so little? Amplitude becomes so little, so will be little activity, which means we will not have enough energy. And we don't have only this 3 watt per square meter from 1,366 or 1,361. So it is tiny amount, but it turned out it is very essential for the life on Earth. So we have to pay attention to this.
Just to make it clear for listeners, they're telling us that we're having record temperatures in June, record heating in May, that is the hottest month and year on record, the hottest day, and we're hearing this across the world. And we're all sat here saying, we don't feel it getting any warmer. It doesn't feel like I just lived through a hottest month or a hottest year.
Exactly.
But they keep telling us this. So it sounds to me like you are completely at odds with what they're saying.
Not me, that many others. If you look on the website, my connections and the people, they say the same things.
But they don't want to listen to you.
The House of Lords, I had supporters there, Lord Moxton and others, they wrote letters, and they speaking, at least conservatives speaking positively about this decrease of the temperature, because this is the real thing. This is the real thing which is coming. The global warming is still there, but it is not produced by humans. So these are another story if you wish to know. This is why they use this picture. You see that at the bottom is solar activity. an average solar activity by dark blue line. And on the right is temperature increase, and the thick red line shows the temperature increase. And because solar activity was reducing then, but temperature increase, they say, no, this has come because people heating this Earth. And you remember, they started pushing me when I spoke about ground solar minimal. You didn't know how much criticism, and they started pushing and everything. But I have big advantage because I had a formula for these two waves. Remember, analytical formula. And my computer and runs uninterruptibly. So I ran it for a week or two, and we calculated the summary curve for 120,000 years and published paper 219. On the top is this amplitude of the solar cycles for the last 12,000 years, from 2000 until 10,000 before Christ. So what we see these cycles repeating each other. Every 5 cycles are repeated in shape during the whole cycle. And it was very strange. And when we look at the variations, you see the zero line in here on the red top graph? When we look how the zero line behave, it turns out that the zero line actually oscillates like exact cosine function. And with the period 2000, about 2100 years, and we thought, what could cause this such a nice oscillation? When you have very clear periodic oscillation, it has to be very nicely defined periodic motion on the sky. It cannot be done on the sun. What you see on the sun, remember my curves, two eigenvectors. They're not very accurate. This by product of cosine and cosine of cosine functions. But this one is like exactly cosine functions. It sounds like it is rotating. So what we look at, what could cause, what observations show? Observations show for this solar irradiance derived from the biomass isotope C14 in the trees, it shows also oscillations with this similar period, about 2000 to 2100, 2200 years. So this is what, all right. So it oscillates, but it oscillates zero line. So it looks like sun has different distance from the Earth. This is how this zero line can oscillate. Then we compared, this is another paper, we compared solar irradiance measured by different people, different groups. And we discovered indeed these are these cycles, this period 2200 years in each of them, 2300, which called Hallstatt cycle. It is well known, it is occurs, for thousands and at least minimum 10,000, but we calculated 120,000 it occurs there, at least 60 of them were. So where we are in this Hallstatt cycle, we were exactly what this black line is. And the minimum of this Hallstatt cycle was here, where it was found the minimum. So it means that the sun, the reliance started increasing towards the northern polarity, to the northern pole. And we are here somewhere. And the inclination of the solar magnetic field and solar irradiance are similar. So this is what we thought, maybe this is why this increase of the temperature is caused by the fact that the sun becomes closer to the Earth. And this is why this straight line temperature increases. These oscillations up-down is a variation of the solar cycle activity and some other terrestrial variations. So we look first, what can it do? We look at the celestial mechanics and how the planets rotate around the Earth. We look at that. So what we look, Milankovitch cycles, all the cycles, look at them. There was obliquity, axial tilt, and eccentricity of the axis. All these periods varied from 15,000 to 100 thousand years. None of them was about a couple of thousand years. So none of them was suitable. This orbital motion, well known for different periods, called Milankovitch cycles. Then we noticed some papers, people look, solar inertial motion. Probably you never heard about it, but it does exist. So all the planets rotate around not around the sun, but around the center of Sun-Earth system, which called barycenter. And the sun, it also rotates around this barycenter. And this is how it happens. So this is your barycenter of the planetary system. And green are the position of the sun in different years. And this is solar orbit simulator taken from NASA website and also Paris Meudon Observatory. So it is well known. Let's say astrophysicists, how they find exoplanets. They find exoplanets when they find that the main star has a wobbling radiation. If it wobbling because the star becomes either closer or further, it means that the star has a planetary system. So the solar orbital motion, it is indication that this star has a planetary system. And you see how the sun, it can go up to 2 solar radius, one direction, and 2 solar radius another direction. Actually, 2 solar diameters distance difference will be. And this is what is happening during this the 2 millennium cycle, Hallstatt cycle. These were examples where the sun can be rotated, can be exist in different years. You can go and Google it and find this simulator because I took it from the official sites. So what is happening? I just drop you system. So this assume this sun barycenter of the Earth's rotation. The sun, instead of sitting in this barycenter, it moves on these orbits. And what it happens, every 1,000 years, it moves closer and closer to the Earth during the spring equinox. During the March, every year, comes closer and closer to us and will be coming closer until 2600, which means that if sun come closer, it will give more radiation to the Earth. You understand? Because the radiation coming from the sun is inversely proportional distance between sun and the planet. So if the sun come closer to the Earth and distance becomes smaller, then it produces more radiation to the sun, to the Earth. And this is the reason why we have increase of the temperature. We have a huge object. When I published this paper, you should see for 6 months they crucified on the different website that it is heresy. The sun radiation cannot change and everything. So the main anthropogenic woman protagonist was Professor Rice from Edinburgh University. He said, no, all planets rotate about barycenter, but the Earth follow the sun in its solar inertial motion. So he was given this picture. This is the sun, yellow, and the Earth, instead of rotating on nice elliptical orbit, follows like a drunk man for the sun. I said, it cannot be true. They retracted my paper, and at that time, it was March 2020, we got into the COVID lockdown, and I was sitting at home. So I got on the NASA website and downloaded the ephemeris distances between sun and Earth. They published for 6 millenniums. Everyone can do it. I just presented for people, published this in book chapter in March 2021. And this shows that this is the distance between sun and Earth in 600, and it keep reducing from to 1600, and much more will be reduced to 2600. And what is most interesting, what you can see that winter solstice, is not in December even in the years in this millennium. It coming in January, and by 26,000, it will be solar winter solstice will be 16th of January, 16th or 18th of January. So basically, what is happening, this distance changes very dramatically and exactly how we wrote in that paper. So we were right. And I said so. This ephemeris, official ephemeris by done NASA and repeated similar one in Paris Meudon Observatory. So what basically, this is what I'm saying. In the previous millennium, we have a normal orbit. The summer of solstice was in June, as they predict. But in this millennium, when the temperature is increasing, the summer solstice is in July, and literally very late July, which means this is how your orbit looks like. So this is the focus, F0 in here, and this is the largest orbit. And normally with this elliptical orbit, on the left-hand side, it is perihelion, on the right is apohelium, the furthest distance. But because of the solar inertial motion, you have these green lines, and the sun moves actually along this line, which is not now the largest axis of the ellipse, but the intermediate one. This is why the temperature is increasing, because sun become closer to the Earth, like shown in this simulation of solar inertial motion. And dear Mr. Rice compromised himself completely, because either he doesn't know celestial mechanics if he calculated this rubbish, or he knew celestial mechanics, but he deliberately misled all the people what is happening. So this is what vindicated in my chapter. So now we know that on the sun produces this heat, nothing to do with human being. And I had verification of the solar irradiance. So we calculated variation of solar irradiance in the previous millennium. In here, the total solar irradiance per year and the total consumption on the Earth per year and this millennium, millennium 2, and the difference between them, between previous millenniums and this one, about 20, 25 watt per square meter. So we getting in this from 1700 to 2600, we getting every year more than 20 watt per square meter than we had before. Okay, we can split it 10 watt per square meter for each hemisphere, but this is a huge amount. And this is what this produces. There is extra solar forcing caused by gravitation of planets, which is likely reason of the main part of the global warming. This is what is the main issue, and nothing to do with CO2. We know CO2 is a very good gas. Every garden center put the CO2 into the gardening places to make their greenish be very healthy and better. The 90% of CO2 which produce extra in the earth goes into our vegetation, not to planet anything. So it's impossible to heat. So we found that there is extra solar irradiance, 20 watt per square meter in 2020. And every year the sun getting closer. Of course, we have hotter temperature because sun comes closer and closer, and we have another 500 years. The temperature is expected, which I calculated, would increase extra 2.5, 3 Celsius else. And it is nothing unusual, because if you look at the history in Great Britain, in Roman Empire times, in Scotland, 300, 400, they grew up grapes. It was so hot. It was hot like in Italy. If they grew up grapes and made wine, it was very hot. And it was exactly 2000 or 100, 500, 1,500 years ago, another 500, we have increase of this temperature. The Earth had, in the last 120,000 years, 60 of this global warming. And because we still live on Earth, it survived. and nowhere was any technology. So everything was happening only because of the natural orbital motion and variation of solar activity. So if we come back to the increase of the temperature, we bring here the increase of the temperature. You see, if now it is 1.5, when it gets here, it will be another 2.53 Celsius increase. And I think we will survive. Much easier survive with the hotter temperature than the cold one. But what is the point? The nature designed everything very smartly. So instead of giving this steady increase of the temperature for 1,000 years, the sun got this grand solar minimum and grand cycles. So we now have 30 years of this mini ice age and reduction of the temperature to figure out what to do when the grand solar minimum returns. But it returns in cycle 28. The last cycle grand solar minimum will be 27, and 28 is start increasing, and the amplitude in the next grand solar cycle are similar like in the previous one. So we need to think how our ancestors or our people who live after us will survive here. This is the point. So everything comes from the sun, and here is we compared different effects of solar activity on the terrestrial variations. And I can send you this slide because it is a nice poster. So something like variation, it will be strong increase of volcanic eruption in cycle 26.
Oh, can you tell us a little bit more about that, Valentina? Because a lot of people think it's just going to be a lot colder and we'll struggle to grow food.
Absolutely.
But what about these volcanic eruptions? Okay, everybody, that's it for part number 1 of this fantastic interview. But please do consider joining us over on parallelmic.com to listen to the rest of the episode. This is certainly one of the most important ones I think I've done this year because it's just so consequential. And Valentina gives us a really good rundown as to what we're going to see and what we might start to do to get ready for it. Also, one final reminder, I do have group coaching for investors coming up in May this year. So if that's something that interests you, if you want to take wealth preservation seriously and learn the skills that you need to protect and grow your wealth going into harder times, well, you can find out more information on parallelmic.com. And with that, I'm going to end this one. So thank you so much for listening. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.
What you are basically. Deep, deep down, far, far in, is simply the fabric and structure of existence itself.
Peace for all men and women, for all men and women, for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, peace in all time.
Honestly expressing yourself.
Peace for all men and women, for all men and women, for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, peace in all time.
The fabric and structure of existence itself.
Within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you the people have the power.
Peace for all men and women, for all men and women, for all men and women.
The fabric and structure of existence itself.
honestly expressing yourself.
Peace for all men and women, for all men and women, for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, peace in all time.